In this part of the lesson, we're going to learn how to use the switch function to perform a sequence of mutually exclusive logical tests and then return a single value as an answer. Let's start by opening up the file that I've already downloaded and extracted, and if necessary, click the Enable Content button to allow the code in the file to work. So what we have here is a very basic BMI calculator. BMI stands for Body Mass Index. And we can calculate the BMI of a person by dividing the height in meters by the square of the weight in kilograms. We've already got the code in there that calculates the BMI value. What we'd also like to do is add some code which works out which category a person falls into based on the result. If we switch into the VBA editor, we can find out what those bands are. I've added a quick comment here that shows you if the BMI is below 18.5, you're categorized as underweight, and so on and so on and so on. So we have a single value, the BMI, that falls into one of 5 different bands. We'll use a switch function to calculate it. Let's start by referencing the cell that we want the result of our switch function to end up in. So in this case, it's going to be range B5. I want to set the value of B5 to be equal to the result of my switch function. So I can look for the switch function and then open up some parentheses and see a not particularly helpful tooltip explaining how the parameter list works. It says param array and some other bits and bobs as well, which aren't particularly useful at this point in the course. Essentially, to make a valid switch function, you need to write at least one logical test and then one single answer if that logical test returns true. So let's simply add in the code that checks if a person's BMI indicates that they are underweight. I'm going to provide a space and an underscore so that I can break this instruction across multiple different lines. My logical test will be range B4.value. I'll make sure that I get the double quotes in there rather than the number 2. Range B4.value is less than 18.5. If that condition returns true, I want to return the answer of underweight to that cell. So instead of double quotes, I'll write the word underweight. If I can spell that properly, that will always help. All right, so technically that's a perfectly valid switch function, not a massively helpful one at this point, but it will work. Let's just quickly prove that that's the case. If I switch back to the Excel window and if I click my calculate button at the moment, because the BMI is not less than 18.5, I won't return anything to the correct cell. So let's try doing something like bumping up the height or bumping down the weight. That's always preferable, isn't it? Let's bump down the weight. Let's knock 20 kilos off the weight of whichever person was used as the example for this calculator. If I click calculate again now, the BMI has dropped to less than 18.5, so the person is categorized as underweight. Now we can simply go back to the switch function and start adding in the other categories. So if we head back to the Visual Basic Editor, we can expand our switch function by adding a comma after the first answer. And then I'll give myself a space and an underscore so I can write this on the next line. And then I find it pointless writing all that out again. So let's copy and paste that part of the instruction, paste it onto the next line. This time we can check if the weight is less than 25. Or sorry, the BMI is less than 25. And if that's the case, the person will be described as healthy. Then I can hit enter to take my parenthesis down to the next line and paste in what I've just copied again. This time let's check if the BMI is less than 30. And if that's the case, the person will be described as overweight. So let's just change this to overweight. We can carry on in that vein until we've covered all the different categories. Let's add in the obese category. We might as well, so I can paste that in and then we can check if it's less than 40 and that will be obese. And we can finally add in the category for morbidly obese. So the way I'm going to do that in this example is check explicitly whether the weight is, or sorry, the BMI is at least 40. I believe this is meant to be 40 or more is morbidly obese. So let's just alter the condition there to say greater than or equal to 40. And then this awful sounding phrase, morbidly obese. There we go. I just need to remove the comma and the space and underscore now, as that's the final argument. I'm not going to provide any more logical tests or answers, so I can remove these characters at the end of the statement and just close a parentheses at the end to create a valid switch function. Let's just head back to the Excel workbook now and try a couple of other values. So let's bump the weight back up to 79.2 and see what effect that has on the BMI and the category. So if I click the calculate button, that person's described as healthy, as it turns out. So between 18.5 and 25. If we maybe bump up the weights by another, let's say 10 kilos, let's see what happens then. We go to 89.2 and calculate, that's overweight. So it all seems to be working. There is one small improvement we could make to the code we've written so far, and it's related to the very last condition we test for if I switch back to the Visual Basic editor. The switch function evaluates the conditions you provide in the order you've written them, and as soon as one of these returns true, it will return the answer that immediately follows it. So if we've written this final condition, greater than or equal to 40, this one will only ever be reached if all of the previous conditions have failed. So technically this one should always return true. Rather than explicitly testing if it does, we could just shortcut this by replacing the condition with the value true. So assuming all of the previous conditions fail, this one evaluates to true, thus we return this result. We can quickly check that this is the case again by going back to the Excel window, and then let's change a couple of values here. So I looked this up. The largest person in the world, the heaviest person in the world, apparently, a chap called John Minnick, he was 1.85 meters, and then the weight was unbelievably 640 kilograms. So if I calculate the BMI for this chap, his name's spelt in the text below the video, by the way, so if you wanted to look this up, there we go, BMI of 187, definitely morbidly obese. At this point, you could either carry on with the extra practice session at the end of this part of the lesson to get some more experience with writing switch functions. Alternatively, you could just move on to the next lesson in this module, which explains how to write some basic loops.